Okay. Good morning, Monday. After record snow on Sunday, we are psyched to own this, although Milton didn't really help out in terms of record snow. Anyway,
much shoveling.
tonight we're going to try and make up our minds about how we feel on a number of articles. Some of them we've discussed before with the Town Government Study Committee, and they will be in forthwith. But first, we're going to look at Article 47, which is a citizen's petition to declare a moratorium on certain signage and to set up a committee to review all the signage and regulations around signs in town. So I thought it would be, in addition to welcoming the citizens, Amy and Michael Lenane, and maybe Laura Griffin will speak to it as well. I thought it would be intelligent to have our Director of Planning, Bill Clark, here tell us about it, because he he is aide to the Sign Review Committee, I believe. Although I thought he was a member of the Sign Review Committee, but he certainly can speak for them. And of course, the Sign Review Committee is the board that is charged with some oversight here. And I couldn't actually find out what the original charge to the Sign Review Committee was from the town report. It doesn't list an article in which they are set up, by which they are set up. Do you know, Bill?
I don't. I know it's an appointed board by the Board of Selectmen.
Okay. I thought it might be nice to see what their original charge was, so that we could see if it already comprehended the subject matter of this article, for instance.
It predates me, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Anyway, if anybody had an idea of where we could find that, that would be interesting.
I'll find it and get it to you.
Okay, great. Anyway, so Bill, tell us what the Sign Review Committee thinks about this citizens petition, and we'll ask you some questions.
Sure.
Great.
On Monday, March 9th, the Sign Review Committee met to discuss the citizen petition article. And for as much as the article itself talks about LED and neon signs, it had to do more with lit signs. So the committee had a discussion on electronic message boards. The definitive portion of the bylaw dealing with lit signs. So the Sign Review Committee came up with a recommendation, and that is they wish to refer the citizens petition dealing with signs back to the Sign Review Committee for further study. The Sign Review Committee recommends that language be added to the existing zoning bylaws that eliminates colored electronic message boards, no grandfathering of any sign be allowed, and the definition of lit signs be added to the bylaws. So it would be their intent to meet between now and the closing of the October warrant to add those three pieces to the zoning bylaw. At that point, they would be addressing most of the issues that are in the citizen petition.
Okay. Do you want to take those up one by one? There were about 3 measures, I think you suggested.
Could you put the petition back on the board for me?
I can.
Thank you.
This is the article itself, the citizens petition. I can maybe make this somewhat larger. Not much. Sorry. Sure. Can you read that?
I can. To see if the town will vote to declare a moratorium immediately on allowing neon and LED signs, similar illuminated signage, all other prohibited signage, and cloth advertising banners, while a five-member committee appointed by the town moderator conducts a thorough study and review of the commercial sign bylaws, appropriate for historic Milton, and an examination of the legality of current signage.
Okay.
You want the rest, or? you
No,
wanna
I mean,
discuss it?
it goes on to say this moratorium shall not in any way affect municipal signs and shall terminate after the committee concludes its study and recommendations. And then it talks about the committee shall publicize its meetings and examine all issues. Pretty much gives the committee a large assignment, you know, to compare our bylaws to similar towns and look at, you know, a lot of stuff. Size, lettering, coloring, time limits, public notice, as well as who might the proper board be for exemption from any of the measures, as well as any additional issue this committee determines should be reviewed. So it's a pretty broad as to what the committee might be. But at any rate, the sign review committee's recommendation on this is to send it back to the sign review committee for further study?
It
that
is.
what I'm hearing?
The sign review committee is made up of 3 members. John Zykowitz is the chair, Ray Thill, and Larry Johnson. The basic sign proposal comes into me at the planning department, and I get to determine whether it's something that goes directly to the building department or if it's something that has to go through sign review. If it goes through the sign review committee, the sign review committee is an advisory committee to the selectmen, so that they make their recommendation to the selectmen if it's something that needs to be discussed further. Lit signs, all lit signs have to go through the selectmen. So any lit sign will have a recommendation one way or the other, written and given to the selectmen for inclusion on their agenda. At the sign review committee meetings, there is a complete discussion of the submittal. It deals with size, color, lit, what the signage actually is for, to make sure that it's not just pictures in a window or signage that changes all the time. It's something that fits within that particular district. There is a design guideline book that gets passed out to everybody that files for or requests an application for signage. Between the committee and myself, we meet with the applicants, go over the submittal, and if it goes through the sign committee, it has a recommendation up or down. A lot of times, the initial sign that came in the application has already been changed. There's some that don't get changed, but I'd say the majority do.
Okay, so that's a good description of the workings of the sign review committee. But they had some recommendations of changing the bylaw. Now, we
don't have.
we
a
were
lot
all
of-
here last fall when we passed a zoning bylaw on commercial signage. I mean, I think it was laudably restrictive, but that got wiped out by the stroke of a comma. So, what can you say? At any rate, but apparently the sign review committee thinks that particular bylaw could be supplemented with some additional provisions.
It does,
That might
because
be in the spirit of this article, or, anyway, so can you go over those supplementary
Sure.
additions again?
the suggestions from the sign review committee were to add language that eliminates multicolor electric message boards, boards that are an LED board that tells a story, shows a bunch of pictures, that has the ability to change. And I know that we're all referring to the Sleepy sign, but before it was Sleepy's, it was something else. And it was changing every like 30 seconds or something. The idea was to make it not change. The sign review committee did not approve that sign. They actually voted against it. That was a no vote that went to the selectmen, and the selectmen did feel that the property was such that it couldn't be matched by anything else in town. You can use that property by using just the expressway, and you come out you go in one side, you go out the other side, and you're back on the expressway. It's the only property in town you can do that to. That being said, the sign did go up. The issue of no grandfathering, well, the sign review committee is all for not being able to grandfather from one business to the next. And the third part to that was more definition to lit signs, because right now there is nothing in there in the bylaw about lit signs. So putting something in the definitions of that. For as much as we're looking to rewrite, put in new wording into the bylaw, it would be to work on updating the design guidelines so that it too picks up on the use of LED. LED isn't I think the citizen petition that's submitted here is aiming at LED, where they're picking on a certain type of sign where LED is actually a light source. They're picking on a light source, and there are certain signs in town now that have LED lighting that particular sign, only you probably don't even know it. But
I have some LEDs as light bulbs in my house, and I wouldn't know it.
there you go. Every hallway in this building is lit by LED lights, and you don't know it.
I had Darnell first and then Paul.
Okay.
One question I had, grandfather. Okay, you described grandfathering as not being able to pass it on as you change businesses. But I infer grandfathering as if your sign does not meet this current or new standard, it must go, even though it might have been approved and everything years ago. So, to me, when you say grandfathering, can you give me a little better explanation? Because when I see grandfathering is allowing what's there to stay, and now you're saying no grandfathering. Like, how restrictive would that be if something like this would pass?
I think it is more the case of when you change businesses, the sign comes down.
That's not, well, at least I say that to me is not the typical understanding of grandfathering. I understand not being able to pass it on to a new business owner. That's one thing, but if you also say no, usually you say you grandfather in existing. So if somebody does buy the business, then it won't come. But if you say no grandfathering, to me that means basically,
Every sign has to come back and stand on its own.
and that means as of the passage of this. And if it doesn't,
Moving forward upon passage of the bylaw that would include the comment about grandfathering means that should the business,
it means
it's not that if you sell the business, it's if you sell the business and change the use. Change it to, you're selling widgets, and it's, you're changing now to making lawnmowers. You're not going to get to keep whatever the widget factory had. You had to go get your own sign and deal with it from the beginning. Case in point,
I understand.
I know. It would remove the idea that you could leave the sleepy sign on the building.
Well, my thing is like to me, when you say grandfathering, that to me would be grandfathering. When you say no grandfathering of signs, everything as of the passage comes under review. And I mean everything. That's what I'm saying. If everything so that means you could have had a sign for 15 years there. It's after the passage of this is automatically under review. You know what I'm saying? That's what when you say grandfather.
That's not their intent.
Okay, so I mean I think we should spell that out.
It's Darnell's widgets, and I buy Darnell's widgets and put Bill's widgets up. No, it's We're going from widgets to widgets to widgets. We're not changing the use of that. But if we change from widgets to lawnmowers, yes, we have to change.
Okay, so I think,
We'll just have to be careful and
I think the wording,
define.
like I
and
said,
that's
I
why
can understand it, but
We're going back to the
that wording.
committee, so we'll come back and we'll make sure we get the right wording.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's just the wording, because if and the reason I say that is because if I'm upset with a sign that my
Okay.
neighbor has, I say, well, you look in here, it says no grandfather, and I can make that argument. You know, so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I kind of like the idea that if a sign changes hands along with the business, that it gets reviewed again from
Yes.
scratch.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you might have some difficulty with somebody who owns a large sign who thinks that you are now taking value away from their business and their ability to sell. But I think you should. I think it's a great idea, because things change, technologies change, and just because you have a nice place to put a sign doesn't mean that you should put all kinds of different new technology on it. But anyway, Paul.
Bill, just for clarification, the citizens petition is offering a moratorium, which would probably be temporary, correct?
It doesn't say that.
It does say that. It says until they make a recommendation, and then the moratorium ends.
Whereas a change in the bylaw would make it part of our bylaws.
Yep.
So you're talking about a more permanent solution, whereas the citizens petition is offering a temporary solution.
Can we get a clarification on that? I think it says that the moratorium shall not in any way affect municipal signs and shall terminate after the committee concludes its study and recommendations for an updated sign bylaw are approved by the town. Okay, so it would only cease to exist after a new bylaw is approved. Is that what it says?
You'd have a moratorium until the sign is approved. Until the bylaw is approved.
Mm-hmm.
So
No one.
by your recommendation, then you would be sort of eliminating the moratorium, but you're still pursuing the change in the bylaw.
Yes.
Okay. So the other thing is, this bylaw, does this require a majority vote, or is this a 2/3 vote? Do you know?
If you're adding to it, it's 2/3. If you're adding to the bylaw, 2/3.
Zoning, it's 2/3. So this would require a 2/3 vote to get this passed through town meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
This particular article would require a 2/3 vote?
If it's making recommendations to the bylaw, yes.
It's not.
It's not.
It's just
See, this article, as it stands, would be I think would
It's
be a
just a
majority
more-
vote, whereas the bylaw change would be 2/3. But the bylaw change would be more permanent, obviously.
No,
because
an
it's-
updated sign bylaw.
It's
Right.
contingent upon that, but it doesn't
Right.
affect.
That, I'm
it
just,
doesn't-
But a bylaw is a bylaw,
bylaw's a bylaw,
2/3.
2/3, and it becomes part of
Okay.
Milton's bylaws.
Yes.
All right, let's get clear. This article is proposing a moratorium while a committee studies recommendations for a change in the bylaw, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so, since it's not recommending a change in the bylaw with this article, but rather through the committee process, and then it would recommend a change in the bylaw, does this article need a 2/3 majority to pass?
I don't think so.
That's gonna be interesting.
Because it's not a change in
Any
the bylaw.
opinions
well,
from,
no.
any
lawyers back there?
legal-minded guests?
We don't think it does.
We don't think it does, so it'd be a simple majority to pass this rather than a 2/3. Whatever this committee might suggest would certainly need a 2/3 vote, and certainly whatever,
I do have a question.
That's
You're
fair.
suspending
You're
a
suspending.
bylaw.
That's what it is.
Well,
I would ask for,
That's true.
I would prefer we get some actual legal counsel on that, because you are actually affecting
ongoing,
ongoing
Business.
business and restricting bylaws by this motion, so you
Sure.
are, you're in effect surrounded and making it tougher to come back. You're making it even tougher to come back and actually free up the existing operations,
so the other thing is, and we'll get to the proponents of this article in a bit, but the wording is confusing. Is it a moratorium immediately on new signage or on existing signage? It would seem to be a moratorium on existing signage, which means you're asking people to shut things down.
That's what this
No?
is that they handed out.
Okay, no? All right. But anyway,
That's why.
so we'll sort this out, but let's move on. Kevin has a question.
Okay, Bill, I'm really not a gambling man, but looking at this list of the residents who signed this article, I would bet that since 18 out of the, I think it's 22, live basically in the same neighborhood, that this has something to do with sleepies.
I think that's why I said sleepies.
So it's really about sleepies.
You have to ask them.
Oh, they say no.
No, I think it was just the easiest ones to get.
Okay.
And it took two.
Sorry. Because we're on TV, you have to come to the table if you're going to speak, but
Can I just ask that maybe they can join the conversation and explain their point of view? It might be helpful for the discussion if Bill could respond to some of their points, because I want to hear the whole thing, and I feel like I'm hearing part of
okay,
it.
Betty, that's great. I do still want to get through the rest of the sign
Okay.
review's recommendations. Okay?
So, the reason the signatures are from that area is because that's the street we live on. The sign that actually, and that prompted me to really get involved and try to,
Excuse
Okay.
me, could you tell us who you are,
oh,
please?
yeah.
Thanks.
So
Sorry,
I'm-
I should have introduced you. This is Amy Linane and Michael Linane of Grafton Avenue. And
Laura Griffin of Denmark Avenue.
thank you, Laura.
Does everybody have a copy of?
Are you, I didn't see your, I'm happy to have you here.
21.
You're number 21. Okay, I only got the first 10.
Okay.
The next page.
No,
That's not what-
no.
Not on what I was
Not on the
afforded
warrant.
by the
No, they only put 10 in the warrant.
Only
Yeah.
two.
warrant.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, glad to have you. So the question is, Kevin's question was, isn't this really all about sleepies? Because judging from your address, so.
So, can I give a 2-minute
Please.
overview? Okay, so basically, I'm sorry if the article is confusing, and it's the first time I've gotten involved in this type of thing. Basically, the article is asking for two things. It's asking for the committee to study the bylaws and the sign reviews recommendations, which they have a great write-up on what they need. And backlit signs, you're right, we use the wrong wording. It's not LED, it should be backlit signs. So there is some confusion there. But the bylaws say any backlit signs has to go to the selectmen. And I think that's where a lot of the problem is the approval process of backlit and brightly lit signs in Milton. The recommendations in all of the sign committee documents do not have that and do not recommend that. So in recent years, there's been an increase in all of this. We have Sleepies. Blue Hills Bank is actually the one that got me going. You know, I came home from work, and you come to the fork in the road. You have St. Agatha's Church on one side. You have historic buildings in front of you. And Blue Hills Bank is this bright blue, yellow, bright blue sign, and it actually had a border on it, which was very against everything else in the sign committee's document. So it's that sign that really just tipped me over. But on top of that, we have flashing lights in the gas stations. We have lottery advertisements in the gas stations that are all brightly lit, so I can pass those out. There's a big law firm one when I'm coming home from work now, you can see on the right. So I'm just not sure where this approval process is coming from, because it's not within the sign committee's recommendations. It's really with the selectmen, and they're approving that, and I'm not exactly sure when the sign committee's in line with them, because as mentioned, Sleepy's was not. So if you go, being from Milton, I think that's where the big thing is. We need to sit down and understand this. There is some confusion, and I don't think it's really what my understanding of where Milton was going with what they want for signs. So I think it's better to slow down and take a look at this and make a good recommendation for the bylaws. let's make sure it's in line with the Milton Master Plan. We have a lot of people spending a lot of time on historic value, historic things in Milton. So this is, not really historic, this is more urban feeling. So those are, and with that said, a lot of people, there's great examples. A lot of signs that went up recently have put a lot of thought and go right in line with all of the sign recommendations. So I'm happy to hand out examples, but that's.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So I gather this article is somewhat in response to the appearance of new signage, which in your opinion does not fit within the standards as published by the Sign Review Committee.
Right.
And so you're looking for an explanation as to why this is happening, or in short of that, you want to stop it from happening until you understand
Right, at least
what's
understand.
going on. So these are all lit signs, Bill, that they're talking about, right?
Yep.
And you just told me that all lit signs go to the Board of Selectmen through the Sign Review Committee.
Yes.
Okay, so the Sign Review Committee has an opinion on all these signs? Each
They do.
one separately?
They do, but if you look at the way the bylaw is written, if you're in the commercial district, you can have a sign. If the sign is pre-existing, and I know one of the pages that just went around is a pre-existing sign that had a new face put on it. So it was not a case of, asking for a new sign, it was just putting a new face to it. The Blue Hill Bank, the signage came in, and the signage was all taken and approved by the committee. It was sent to the selectmen with the same approval. The trim that's on the building, the outline of the building that has lighting to it, is more a design feature of the building. It is not part of the signage. It was never in the signage request, and the sign committee does not believe that it is part of the signage either. The building inspector, he did ask them to take and have it shut off, but the sign review committee has taken and discussed it a couple of times, and they do not believe that the trim is part of the sign package. It's just part of the building design itself.
Whoa, here's a whole new can of worms. When is a sign not a sign? When is illumination on a building not part of the signage? Who's going to address that? The Sign Review Committee?
They could, under the, defining what a lit sign is.
Okay. Or perhaps as part of this, they're suggesting that, this is why I wanted to finish the three recommendations that came out of the Sign Reviews
Yep.
committees, at least I think I did. They wanted to not have any moving signage that had moving panels.
I
That
think
was
it's
the number one?
colored electronic message boards.
Okay,
Because
like the Boston Convention Center, that giant thing that changes every minute, every 10 seconds. One of those.
Okay, I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
Haven't seen it, it's awesome. It's awesome, but I wouldn't want it in a residential neighborhood.
Exactly.
Their second point was on grandfathering. It was to eliminate grandfathering of any signage when
Yes.
businesses change, not just hands, but intent or purpose.
Okay.
And the third one was something about lit signs. Can you say that one again?
A definition of lit signs be added to the bylaws.
Added,
So
okay.
better definite, more
So
specific.
that definition would include sort of lit building parts, maybe, or intentionally discuss those in one way or the other.
It would at least be discussed.
That would be good. So their basic recommendation in response to this article is, we don't need this article, what we need is these three things put into bylaw, which will satisfy some of these issues. if I hear you correctly.
That is the feeling of the sign review committee.
Okay. The proponents of the article may not feel the same way.
That's true.
So, Laura?
The 18-foot sign that's on Granite Avenue that faces the water and the highway, there's no public notice of
Is there a
these.
name on that sign? Just
Uh,
for,
it's
I don't
Ken-
know
I
what
don't
you're
wanna-
talking about.
It's a law sign. It's a law firm, Ketch's Law Firm.
Okay. I
Okay.
hope they don't sue us, but
Well, that's,
let's talk
that's
about
what
it
I
for
was
what it
trying to
is.
avoid. That's, that was just one line on this agenda. The public had no notice of it. The agenda goes out on Friday, and it's considered on Tuesday night. That's part of the problem, is that the public is not getting any notice on this. Milton's been deluged with these signs. There's sleepy signs, there's this gas sign. When I was at the sign review committee, I think I heard differently than Mr. Clark. I did not hear anything about waiting till October. I did hear the resolution passed unanimously for those three things, and it sounded like they were adding them to the committee. But anyhow, it only means more. I think you can ask selectmen if they hear about these signs. They get phone calls on these signs. And what they've done is set precedents with the sign on 2 Granite Avenue that's 18 feet. That's a billboard, 18 feet. The next tenant in 2 Granite Avenue can say, well, if you have one up there, why can't I have one down here? You're setting precedents. And if you wait till October, there's going to be more precedents. I was at selectmen's meetings in the last 15 years ago, and they would struggle over how many lights to allow above the signs to have the proper lighting. And now we've just been deluged with these signs. There is an urgency in this because they just keep coming and coming. As far as grandfathering in, it means when Kennedy left, and Kennedy, by the way, I do have to tell you this, Kennedy lives in Norwell where they have a wooden, or at least 3 years ago when I was there, on 228, a wooden Dunkin' Donuts sign. If you go down to Hingham, the minute you cross the border from Weymouth to Hingham, you will not see these backlit neon signs or lead signs, whatever they are. When you go into the shipyard, and they're supporting these signs because it supports commercial ventures. You go into the shipyard, try to find a sign like this. I'll give you $100 if you do, because they don't exist. They've got a thriving commercial community down at the shipyard, and you're not gonna, they don't need these signs. You get down 3A from the Weymouth line, and, you know, maybe people want these, and that's why let's take a stop, take a look at it and see what they want. If they want these signs, maybe we can tax them. Maybe we can make some money on them. Anyhow, as I said, the sign review committee also mentioned that there's no code enforcement because of those flashing lights, like there's flashing lights in store windows and gas station windows. With the lottery numbers on them, and there's no code enforcement. So if you allow this committee to make recommendations, give them a broad thing, and maybe there'll be fines to stop some of this, it'll pay for the code enforcement. I mean, maybe you only need a code enforcement officer 1 day a week. But the sign committee did mention that there is no code enforcement officer in the town.
So can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I didn't think that the sign bylaws related to things that were behind windows. Can somebody help me out with that?
We didn't allow it. I mean, they used to make people take down handwritten signs in the windows.
I asked
Michael?
that question last year when we were dealing with the sign bylaw, because I was concerned about a business that had an electronic menu behind the cash register. And we were informed at that time that the signs behind the glass were not affected by the bylaw. So that,
Right,
in my
so-
understanding at the time, was that a lottery sign and other things that they wouldn't be considered by the committee.
That was
because
not
they were in the
subject to code enforcement because there's no code against anything behind the window.
Actually, well, I mean,
So-
I mean, things obviously have changed in 10 years or 15 years, because I can remember selectmen telling them to take a sign out of the window. That you couldn't have a sign in the window, never mind a lighted sign in the window.
Maybe they had no authority to do that.
Huh?
I said maybe they had no authority to do
But
that.
it sounds like before we can just go recommend a bylaw, we need to study it. I think there's enough questions that need to be looked at.
We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for the state and the town to put up these antique lighting, the fancy lamps that are going up. The Milton is spending $50,000 to $100,000 to put up antique clocks. And these clocks are gonna be under these neon signs. As far as the
You're
grandfather.
right, that's an interesting juxtaposition. I have lots of questions coming along, if I can get some in, because otherwise we're gonna spend the whole
all
night
right,
on this.
I don't wanna keep it, but I do.
got Phil, I got Steve, and I've got Bill, who may have a response to something that's already been said, so why don't we start with you, Bill? And then we got Phil and Steve.
Code enforcement has nothing to do with the sign review committee.
It may not, but we're exploring the whole subject.
They mentioned.
So if you had an opinion on that, that would be fine. But yeah, if it's not in the code, it can't be enforced. And my understanding, thank you, Lee Michael, was that anything behind a window was not subject to code enforcement, at least through the commercial sign bylaw. Is that right?
I think you get two different groups going. You've got the sign review committee that's looking at your signage, and you have code enforcement, which is something, it's something different.
But if something was prohibited in the commercial sign bylaw, that would be subject to code enforcement, because it's in the code.
I understand that,
Okay.
but that's
And there's
not the
nothing in the-
sign review committee's charge.
No.
Sign review committee's charge is to look at signs as we move these things forward, not to take and find that somebody put up a lottery sign. That's not,
No, I agree. I don't think that's the purview of the sign committee either.
so I
They're
can't
looking at
answer that other
new, they're
part.
looking at new stuff. But
And they're,
as long as you're looking at the effect of lighted signs,
and I
It was
think
a
that comes
question.
back to being their part three, which is to look at a definition of lit signs. Under lit signs, it can be, is there a percentage of the window that can have a sign within that square footage? I'm not sure that's going to go back and address Lee Michael's, your electronic menu behind, that's something that's inside the store, that's not something that's aimed at the window as much as it's aimed at the counter.
but this is an issue that could be addressed by a committee that came out of this article. Okay. Phil?
Thanks. This question may have been broached. I was late for the meeting, so I apologize, but
We haven't even looked at this.
I'd like to ask the proponents what they mean by a moratorium. What would happen to the current signs that you find offensive?
All right, so that should be another friendly amendment. It should say new backlit. So that's very important. New backlit.
A moratorium on new.
New.
Approving any new,
Approving any new backlit, absolutely. And certainly the signs that are up. But I will say this.
How would you deal with issues of signs that have already been in effect?
You
and
can't do
and
anything about them.
grandfathering, if,
You can't do anything about them, they're there. Santander is there forever until Santander leaves town. But when the sign review talked, they said Santander and Dunkin' Donuts snuck in because of grandfathering. This is what the sign review committee, and I'm sorry, I don't know their names, but I can tell you which ones. But They said that's how Santander got in, that's how Dunkin' Donuts got in, was because they said what the next person at 2 Granite Avenue is going to say, you let it be there for the last person, so it's going to be there for the next person. So when, I guess it was Sovereign left, and apparently they had a smaller sign, Santander came in and put that one up.
But you'd be prepared to let this committee recommend an end to the grandfathering of the current signs?
To
Well, you
study
can't,
it.
no, absolutely, you can't do that. Legally, you can't. Oh,
Well, wait a minute. Which committee? Let's make it
The committee that you're asking to be appointed.
yeah, I
You
mean,
would
couldn't,
be fine if that committee came back and ended as a bylaw the grandfathering of signs that have been governed in this town for some time.
only meaning that when
The transmit-
Santander leaves, Dunkin' Donuts is not gonna leave, but if Dunkin' Donuts were to leave, that the next business does not inherit or buy the rights to that signage.
Okay.
It has nothing, you can't do anything about the signs
Not
that are up.
transferable,
You,
really.
you can't do anything about the signs that are up. They're there. Unless they're illegal. And some of them are.
Okay.
Ju-
Are you
just-
going to address that?
I got a point of,
Okay.
just to
you, Bill.
clarify something. There's nothing wrong with Dunkin' Donuts sign. Dunkin' Donuts sign is, it meets all of what our guidelines state it should. I know that Laura picked up that somebody at the committee said that, and then they went back and had to look at the sign. It's the letters only that you see at night. It is not a case that the entire box is lit up and you see the entire box. This is, the box is lit, the background is opaque, and the letters are what you see. So you see Dunkin' Donuts, you see a border that goes around Dunkin' Donuts. That is an acceptable usage per our guidelines. And they did go through the sign review committee to get it.
Okay, I have Steve and Paul and, okay, Steve.
So it's evident to me, based on the fact that we took up a bylaw change last fall, and then that this is returned, that there is a need, there's discontent with how signs are done, and there's need to study it and come up with some workable solutions. The problem I have with this is declaring a non-ending moratorium, other than for the fact that when this committee reports, I think it's a very bad precedent. I wouldn't support it unless there was an end date to it. You wouldn't do this, we have existing bylaws, you wouldn't put moratoriums on the enforcement of any of those other bylaws until another report came out. If it said 6 months and they were gonna deliver something, but this could go on and on. This is, the intersection of free speech and, the pursuit of happiness, or whatever you want to call it. One person's tacky is another person's tactful. So this could go on and on for a while, and that's problematic to me, that there's a moratorium with no defined end date.
Okay.
So can that be addressed with a friendly amendment, though? Can the warrant make those recommendations and we still keep this moving for the town meeting? So if we put, I think we've already highlighted a couple of things that were wrong.
Friendly amendment comes from the citizens. I believe it has to come from the citizens. And so you would have to make that, and
So can you make a recommendation with a partial, a recommendation if these were submitted, that type of a thing?
I don't
You
know.
want us
I
to
mean,
do a
it's-
rewrite,
it's-
is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm trying to figure out, I think there are probably some issues with the writing. I think we've agreed with that. We used LED and we should have used backlit. We really are looking for a moratorium on new signs right now, and I think there's a lot of concern about the old signs, so we certainly are not looking for anything to be done on the old signs. So I think the lighting, the moratorium, and then the end date are the three things that I'm hearing so far that people are having issues with here.
And I'm not going to guide you one way or the other, but I do know that when you get to a certain point of rewriting these citizens petitions, that the people who signed it may have to sign it again, because it may or may not be the same article that they had agreed to support in the first place. And I don't know where that line is. I just,
Right.
But this article would support the signage that we have had. You know what's sad is you have this lovely signage on one side of Granite Avenue, and on the other side, facing them, is the neon sign almost laughing at them. Ha ha, you followed the rules. And across because you can see this right across the expressway, facing Granite Avenue, facing Fitness Unlimited, that have this kind of previously approved signage with
So,
the,
Laura, I understand you're upset about this,
Yeah.
okay? I can't really take that in from the other end of the table right now, but I don't wish to either. Right now. Paul?
Bill, just as a question, I think Steve might have answered part of it, but why would you recommend that we recommend not doing anything with this article and instead just sending the issue back to the signage committee?
Send it back to the sign review committee
Yes.
versus forming another.
versus
Versus
endorsing it.
recommending endorsing this, or why would you advise this committee not to support this article, but instead just send the issue back to the sign review committee?
I think they deal with signs. I think they've done a good job dealing with signs. I'm giving it back to them for their input.
So who's dropped the ball doing the signs according to the citizens?
The committee feels that those signs are.
I'm asking them, excuse
Okay.
me. So you say the sign committee, the sign review committee's done a good job on it, and they clearly think somebody's not doing a good job with signs.
Excuse me, Ted, the reason I'm asking is because the warrant committee has to write a comment
Mhm.
on this, and we want to know if we do vote the way you're advising us to vote, we have to know why we're going to vote that way. So why should we not endorse a moratorium, not endorse this article, and instead just simply refer the matter back to the sign review committee?
I think signs are handled by the sign review committee, and that's where the rewrite should be coming from.
So you believe this article needs to be rewritten? That as it stands, it's...
I said send it back to the sign review committee, and for them to take up adding language to the existing bylaws that eliminates the colored electric message boards, the grandfathering of signs, and a definition of lit signs, which this goes to the issue of the lit signs. I think the sign review committee added in a few more things, but
And you think they would have an article ready for the October cycle?
please.
You think they would have an article ready for October?
I think they could.
I did not hear them say that. I have a tape of that meeting. I
Um,
didn't hear that.
I have Katie Conlon and then Mike. Katie?
Just a point of information, if it's going to be referred to any,
Oh, sorry, you have to come to the table. Sorry.
thank you. The selectmen are all here tonight for the subsequent article. We haven't discussed this among ourselves. We did ask the sign review committee to make a recommendation to us, and this is really the first we're hearing of what their thoughts are. So we haven't discussed in any length the citizen article, but the point we wanted to just offer was if you're considering referring this, it wouldn't be back to any board, it would be to a board, since it's a citizen petition.
Right.
We think it would be more appropriate to be the planning board and/or the Board of Selectmen, but the planning board really is the one that writes the zoning bylaws. And we've been told by at least one member of the planning board that they're looking at possibly submitting an article to the October town meeting relating to signs. So that's just food for thought, that if it's going to be referred to anybody, we think the planning board is probably the most appropriate one, and/or the selectmen for further study.
So not the sign review committee, please, Katie?
They're an advisory committee
Okay.
to us, so we'd want to have their input, but bylaws really are within the jurisdiction of the elected boards, and that's really something for the planning board to put forward.
Okay, it is the right of any appointed committee to submit an article. So they could, but
again, bylaws are really, zoning bylaws and bylaws of this nature of signs, the current bylaws were written by the planning board. These really come from the planning board. Yes, a committee can submit a warrant article, but I don't think the sign review committee would be doing anything without consulting with the planning board on something of this nature.
I think the sign review committee actually is an advisory committee to the selectmen, so having an article submitted, having this referred to the planning board and the Board of Selectmen for further study fits.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Please, Kevin.
Well, we have Katie here. Who is responsible for enforcement?
I think it's the building department. Bill, is that
It is,
correct?
yes,
So it's Joe Prondak.
yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, my question was about how we could kind of address the needs that are being raised here while not getting in any kind of hot water or doing things the wrong way. I like what Katie's saying about having the planning board write a bylaw, because they're the experts at writing bylaws, but the concerns me is like things are happening and the neighborhoods aren't being listened to. The planning board's process is going to be an open process. You could be listened there. If you got your moratorium up till, the planning board could the planning board be instructed to get to work on this? That's my question for whoever, I had to get somebody from the planning board here. Because basically, we don't want to refer it to a committee just to sit and nothing happen. The citizens have raised a petition and they,
Yeah, so could you address the possibility that this goes down a black hole if it gets referred back? Or referred to, excuse me, referred to?
Yeah, I can. We just want to point out, the planning board is going to have a public hearing on this citizen article. Is that correct?
You weren't intending to, because if you were intending to, we would have postponed ours until after you
Okay, I had
had
heard that
done.
they were, so if that's not.
Because there is no bylaw to it, no.
Okay. We've had a lot of issues with signs over the past couple of years, and we know that there are some different views in people who have not agreed with some of the action, particularly on the Sleepy sign or on the Catches Law Group sign. And, if something is referred to the planning board or the Board of Selectmen, we're certainly going to take it up if town meeting refers it back to both boards. I think that goes without saying. But I guess I'll leave it at that.
can I just ask a follow-up? So how about the moratorium until, like, say, Halloween,
Yeah, again, Michael, our board hasn't discussed this article. We've not met and talked among the three of us at a public meeting about what this is about. We had the sign review committee, and in January at the time, we talked generally about signs, and we pointed out to them that this article had been filed, and we'd like to get their input. So I think, really, that's probably all we can say right now, is we'd have to have a discussion about it among ourselves and take it up. And we are going to be doing that, since we'll probably be asked what our view is on this at town meeting anyway. But we were really waiting to hear from the sign review committee, and now that we know that, from what Bill has reported tonight, that they've had a discussion about this and they've got some ideas, we'll probably want to bring them in for a meeting. So it won't fall into a black hole. It will certainly get discussed and taken back. Evan, I believe the planning board is already planning on bringing changes to the sign bylaws to the October town meeting.
Okay, Tom, you'll have to come to the table. Thanks.
Well, one thing that the warrant committee could do is, in its recommendation, recommend that it be referred back to the planning board to report back to town meeting by a date specific. And that would solve your problems. I think it's dangerous to try and...
Doesn't always.
Well, it needs to be a date specific, which would force that committee to take some action by that date. But the other problem with the moratorium is, if there are unintended consequences, if it's not well thought out. I mean, what happens if a business does go up in the commercial district? Signs are expensive. They're very expensive, and you can't expect a business to go in there and not have a sign at all. It would be a shame to have them have the sign they don't want, only to find out later that the sign they did want is a legal sign. I mean, all those unintended consequences. think you gotta be careful.
So if they're following the bylaw, they can have a sign. It's when they go to the selectmen and need approval beyond the bylaw, right?
But that's,
And the way-
that's contemplated by the bylaw, and that's permitted within the bylaw, that it's within the discretion of the board in some circumstances. We know that there's
But that's
different
the
opinions on the
problem.
Sleepy's sign, but
Yeah.
the
Not the
Sleepy's,
Sleepy sign.
I just throw the catches log, but we've had other complaints about the Sleepy sign, and again, that's, we had a lot of consultation with town council on that, and there really was no option to not permit the current sign that's up on the Sleepy sign. So,
I mean, I just don't necessarily, I think we could get 1,000 signatures easily. Like, I think that really, when I'm out talking to people, there wasn't a lot of effort getting signatures. Everybody has an opinion on this. Most people, it's not in the character of the town. Truly, it really isn't. I mean, you come through that fork right now, and it's historic, and then you have these big, bright blue signs. But, I mean, I appreciate, I just am not exactly clear how the citizens get, I think this would be a committee of the citizens.
When we went around and got signatures, most of our neighbors were complaining about gas stations and banks. If you could put a moratorium on those in East Milton Square, I think we have enough there right now. We have to drive by those neon lights just to get to Quincy, Dorchester, wherever, and it's not the character of the town. It is not historic feeling, it is not quaint, it's insulting to your eyes.
Oh, I think if you look at any, I mean, you can go to any town now, and that is the new technology with gas stations.
No, you
I-
can go
I'm-
to some of the ones with the bylaws, Hingham, Norwell.
Canton certainly allows them.
I wouldn't.
And unfortunately, this isn't the forum probably to debate it, and we understand that, and we're trying not to use your time for that.
And I can give you one example in Hingham of CVS in Hingham has an LED sign. It's
Okay,
a-
well, let's not worry about other towns.
They exist.
I mean, we're worried about the town of Milton.
Yep.
And there's clearly some discontent on the subject of signage, and there's an article in front of the Warrant Committee. It has its defects, I will be frank with you. It's a little confusing and as to what your intent is, and it, as Steve pointed out, there's no end date to the proposed committee's work. So it's kind of a mess. But you're also dealing with a mess. I can't, a lot of us are probably still up in the air, or a little bit confused as to what the process exactly is for a new lit commercial sign to be approved. Clearly, just because other towns allow it, and just because we have allowed it, perhaps the majority of citizens in town don't wish to continue to allow it. And I don't know what the best process is to accommodate those wishes, especially if it's a majority. I think a moratorium is a dicey business because of new business possibilities. So I don't really know where we're going to go with this. But I do know that we can't have a public hearing on this right now, and we're going to have to move on. And if we can't, we're going to think about it. If we can't come to a conclusion as to what to do to Wednesday night, then we'll have to discuss it further, and we won't have a recommendation in time for printing it in the warrant. So unless people would like to make a motion on this, we're going to move on. Would anybody like to make a motion on this, given the level of information we have, or would anybody like to ask Amy and Michael another question about any aspect of this article? Lee, Michael?
Question for you, Ted.
Sure.
Should we ask the citizens by Wednesday, since we're going to talk about it on Wednesday, to try to draft a recommendation for us to consider so that they have one more opportunity for us to take a look at something? We have so many unanswered questions on the table. It seems like the only thing that we can do at this point is say no recommendation at this time, or refer it to some committees. But a number of citizens did sign it, so is it possible to ask them to write a recommendation that we could consider so that we have something to vote on?
Well, they can't write the recommendation. That's
They
gotta be
could
ours.
recommend us to recommend something, right?
Phil, go ahead.
My only concern about doing that is they may not be aware of all the issues that members around this table might have with this.
Right.
So I don't want to give them false hope.
Right.
That going back and incorporating what they've heard to date would result in a positive vote. My issue is similar to Steve's, but more so. I don't have a problem only with there being no date in it. I have a problem with there being a moratorium in it at all. Because I don't think it's a good precedent to set that we're going to put a moratorium and suspend current bylaws while we're appointing another committee to go out and study a potential new bylaw to replace it, which may or may not happen. I just don't think that's a good precedent to set. If I have sympathy for the issue, I do think that there's some heritage we might like to preserve and that some of these lights don't preserve, but I don't think a moratorium is the right way to do it. And if this contained no moratorium and the language were cleaned up, I might be able to support it.
So is there an opportunity to do that by Wednesday or not? That's what I'm not clear on.
Well, my point is, that's me speaking, that's not anybody else speaking.
Okay, hang on. Laura, you'd like to address
I would.
Bill's comments?
As far as the moratorium, this is only for new signs
I understand.
that do not meet
I understand.
our standards.
Well, it doesn't say that. In fact, your language
Actually,
states,
where is the-
your language states non-conforming signs as a separate item. So it raises great confusion about whether that's the case or not. There should be no
To see-
moratorium in that. at all.
Oh. That non-conforming was changed to backlit.
Well, that's not non-conforming. Not all
Is that
backlit is
in red?
non-conforming.
Huh?
Not all backlit is non-conforming.
Right, it's the backlit signs that we are having trouble with.
I just told you what I could support. I cannot
Okay, that's
support a
fine.
moratorium.
That's fine. The only thing as far as the people that have supported it, I had an article that was, I'm glad I didn't bring it to you folks, last April. And I think it took me half a day to get 65 signatures. Unfortunately, I didn't know that you need 100 in the October as a special town meeting, and luckily I didn't get the signatures. I just said, forget it. And I said, this is a better way to handle it. Let's study it. Let's stop the big signs. Let's stop the neon signs for now. I mean, maybe the town wants them. But then let's tax them. But anyhow, that's.
I believe a citizen's petition with 100 signatures,
For a special town meeting. And October's a special town meeting.
I believe if you bring in a citizen's petition with 100 signatures, that drives its own special town meeting.
Oh, no, that's fine. But I only had like 65 or 70 for the, and I got them in like a day. And it wasn't this area, it was over Cortlandt Circle and all around the back of Adams Street there, Granite Place, those
Well,
places.
And
People
this was
just
also
said, yeah,
about
it's fine.
signage. This was also about
Yep.
signage.
Oh, it was
Okay, so-
signage, yeah.
So people everywhere are exercised about signs. Okay.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that the people that don't live in East Milton are as aware that this signage could come to to Central Ave. This signage could come to Route 28. This signage could come to Blue Hill Avenue. I mean, yeah, a lot of people just think, oh, hey, they live near the commercial district, therefore live with it. But the fact of the matter is, this signage that we don't like, as long as they've set precedents, it can go anywhere in town. That's my, thank you.
Okay, all right, we will, if I have no motion coming right now, then we'll obviously have to vote something the next time we meet, because that will be the last opportunity before the warrant goes to print.
And so you don't recommend trying to rewrite it by Wednesday? That's the piece that I just try to understand that. Do you think we'd have a better chance of passing it if we try to rewrite it with the, I think I heard.
I'm not sure how this works legally. If you
And got signatures, I'm not sure.
and got signatures, if it was sufficiently far away from the original intent of the article, then it might not be allowable, because then it's really not quite, you're not just changing the margins, you're changing the body of it.
The article's already there.
The board would have to open, if you submit a new article, the board would have to open, accept it, and close the
So you can make a friendly amendment on the floor of town meeting.
The recommendation, to the motion. You can't change the
You'll
article.
change the article.
The article's the article.
Right.
Okay.
The warrant committee has basically three options. We can vote that we can vote no, okay? This is a horrible idea, go away, okay? We can vote, this idea has merit, not just, but it should be referred back and written up as, something that will fly through. Perhaps through the planning board, because they do have a public hearing piece to anything they do. Or we could say, yeah, we like this, but we're gonna just change a couple things here and there, okay? But we're really not in the business of rewriting citizens' petitions, and we can't initiate, we wouldn't really be able to initiate any of that on our own without getting your okay. So this is not really what I'm looking forward to be doing right now, so. If you would want to write up some amendments that you would deliver on the floor of town meeting, because regardless of what we recommend, it's going to town meeting.
Right.
Okay? You may want to, at that level, say, here are the motions we'd like to make, and maybe there's enough interest at the town meeting level to
So we need a
push
town
that
meeting
forward.
member to make those motions, and then town meeting votes on it, and we can potentially move forward.
One might.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is